thanks for everybody scrambling on a Friday morning and working your way around Stanford campus and finding this venue. But we're really thrilled to have you here. And we've got a full day of events and some exciting speakers, and I think you'll really enjoy a lot of the content. So most importantly, spend some time with your colleagues, meet some new people, and walk away with some great ideas as to how you may carry forward. So a little bit of background of how the summit all got started. Bill Campbell passed away in April of 2016, and it was a tough time for a lot of us. But I think we thought about how can we carry his legacy forward. And so my wife Diane, Mike Moe, and I went to meet with Brad Smith, who was then CEO of Intuit. He sort of took the baton from Bill and ran Intuit. And we had this idea of creating an event where we could carry Bill's legacy on and create this summit. And so I was probably 30, maybe 40 seconds in to the pitch, explaining to Brad why I think this would be a great idea and how we could really use the support of Intuit. I was about 30 seconds in and Brad said, "Stop." He shut me down. And he said, "Stop." I said, "Okay." He said, "Whatever it takes, we're all in," and that's that's Brad in a nutshell. I mean, he basically commits, he's passionate, he makes things happen, and most of all, he believes in people because I think he learned from Bill Campbell how important it is to have people first in your life. And the organization he led at Intuit has been nothing but phenomenal. During his era, during his tenure, I think the stock appreciated 675%. It was a phenomenal period. He was CEO for 11 years. And during that period, while you might be proud, I think he would be proud that the earnings and the revenues and the stock price appreciated, but I think he was most proud about the culture, that they developed a culture of innovation, of excellence, of committing to greatness, of being bold. And if you walked into their office, you would see the mission statement on the board, and you'd see it throughout the different buildings. So it was really an exciting time, an exciting person to sort of partner with as we thought about the summit. But unlike many leaders, in 2018, after running Intuit for 11 years, Brad basically said, he called me one time and he said, being CEO of Intuit is the job of a lifetime, but it's not a job for a lifetime, which meant at age 57, he's decided to pass the baton on to a successor. And few people really, have achieved, that amount of success, rarely do that. But that's what leadership looks like. And I think that's what Brad exemplifies. What did he do then? He told me he's going to write a new chapter. And he and his wife, Alice, went back to the communities he grew up in West Virginia and began working and trying to help rebuild jobs in the economy and a lot of things. It had sort of stagnated over the decades since he'd left. And along the way, they tapped him on the shoulder to be president of Marshall University. And he wasn't looking for a new job or a new title or some platform, but he had commitment and he had passion and he had resilience. And he wanted to, I think in many ways, do what Bill Campbell taught him to do, which is carry it forward, make a difference, have an impact, and keep working and keep learning. And so I would tell you the summit exists largely because of Brad's persistence and vision and generosity and help. And we're thrilled to have Brad Smith with us today.
Wow, thank you, Mark, for that kind introduction. And I also want to thank you and the team for once again organizing what I believe is the most inspiring gathering of leaders anywhere in the country. I say this every year that I have the opportunity to come and speak to you, for those who've been back in prior years. What makes this event distinctive and special is you can't buy a ticket to get in. You have to earn your seat at the table. And every one of you who've been nominated for the William V. Campbell Trophy have done just that. And it is my privilege to be here with you this morning. It's my privilege because you are the best of the best. Elite student athletes, purpose-driven leaders. It's my privilege because you carry the name of a man who not only coached and mentored and shaped my life, but did that for hundreds and thousands of others. And it's a privilege because I have the opportunity to then return that favor and give back by investing in you investing in your learning, doing that through shared learning, doing that through real conversations, and doing that through experiences you're going to have today and tomorrow that'll be a mix of both inspiration and perspiration. And I'll tell you, I've had the opportunity, as Mark said, to be with him, Mike, Mo, Diane, over every year that the Campbell Trophy Summit has been in existence. And over those years, I've had the chance to share my stories, my memories, the lessons I learned from Bill Campbell. And most recently, I codified that in a piece of work that I shared a couple years ago called The 5 Principles of Leadership. These 5 principles were really principles that Bill led and lived his life by. The first, just to refresh your memory, was potential. When Bill saw someone, he saw 2 people, the person you are and the person you're capable of being. And he made it his life's work to introduce those 2 people. After potential, he went to purpose, and Bill understood that we're our best selves when we sign up for a cause greater than ourselves. So he always challenged me and the company to define an ideal state, a grand challenge, a vision that got your heart beating fast and moved from individual ability to collective capability. Because if your dreams can be achieved alone, you're not dreaming big enough. The third P was people. Bill knew it is not about a team of all-stars. It is an all-star team. And he spent time trying to help us understand how you could get the group playing collectively. And he used to often quote Coach John Wooden, who said, "A player who makes a team great is more valuable than a great player." The fourth principle that Bill reminded us about was Playbook. Bill was the master of simplifying the complex. If you read the book, Bill used to say, "Put more wood behind fewer arrows. Do less better." And he got down to where he would say the critical few. He did not believe in David Letterman's top 10. If you have more than 5 things on your sheet, he took his red marker out and scratched off the ones he thought weren't important to help you get focused. And then the last was to pay it forward. Bill lived this example. There's an old Greek proverb that says, "Society grows great when the current generation plants trees under whose shade they will never sit." Bill Campbell did that. Today is an example of that. The lessons that he taught, the way he lived his life, continues to inspire us almost a decade later after his passing, and you carry forth his name. So those are things I've talked about in the prior years. Today, I want to talk about a topic that is both timely and timeless. How do you lead in periods of disruption and division? There's no question today the pace of change is accelerating exponentially faster. Think of generative AI. Think of all the geopolitical changes, the technological changes, the social changes, the economic changes. In fact, every day, I don't know about you, but on the campus at Marshall University, I feel like I'm dancing between raindrops, just trying to stay dry. And in periods like this, many people choose to armor up. They choose to defend, they choose to divide, and even worse, they choose to disengage. And leadership expects more of us, and Bill Campbell would demand more from us. So I'm going to share with you today 4 pragmatic tips that I learned through the decades that I worked with Bill Campbell that I'm now applying almost a decade after he passed because his message still resonates. The first tip, how to handle hard better. Now, I don't know about you all, but this past year, women's collegiate basketball was really exciting. And the Duke women's basketball team was on a roll, and then they hit a trough. And I was watching this piece where they had the coach, Kara Lawson, being interviewed. And she said, "I had a conversation with my team in the locker room, and one of my players looked me in the eye and said, 'Coach, when's it going to get easier?' And she said, 'We don't get to choose the adversity we face. The reality is life's not going to get easier. What happens is you learn to handle hard better.' I can tell you at the end of the day, we have an opportunity to not just choose how we're going to respond to adversity, but we get to choose who we're going to face it with. And this was where Bill's lesson came to light for me. Bill often told me, "Brad, you're going to become who you surround yourself with." So surround yourself with people who choose to look at adversity as an opportunity to learn and grow. Surround yourself with people who are going to sharpen your thinking, push you beyond your limits, and most importantly, help you laugh when life is getting hard. So what I would encourage you to do is the first pragmatic lesson sounds very elementary, but we don't often think about it enough, is surround yourself with people who've learned to handle hard better and be that person in someone else's life. Look for the silver lining in every crisis and challenge, because it is there and it's possible. The second lesson, seek to understand before you seek to be understood. When I hire new employees, whether it was in my prior life at Intuit or on the university campus or head coaches, I look for three things: intellectual curiosity, humility, and teamwork. If they bring those three characteristics, they will be able to navigate any stressful situation, and they'll be able to navigate any disagreement while preserving the relationships around them. We're now living in a world where people think shouting is more powerful than listening. But great leaders understand you don't build trust until you listen with humility and intention. I'm going to share an example. I once heard someone say about Martin Luther King that what made his life so impactful is he learned to speak without being offensive, he learned to listen without being defensive, and he left even his adversary with their dignity at the end of a disagreement. That is the highest level of civil discourse. And unfortunately, across the globe, it's becoming a lost art. And so I would say to you, we have an opportunity to bring that back into our daily lives, to learn to speak without being offensive, listen without being defensive, and leave our adversaries with their dignity at the end of the disagreement. Because leadership isn't always about having the final word. It's about figuring out how to ask the better question. My third, debate to discover the best idea, not to win the argument. Now, I know, by the way, that when we get into a debate, we have a position we're trying to get forward. But the real opportunity here is to let new data shape your mindset and think differently. So the goal is not about getting your idea advanced, it's about getting to the best idea. And this is important. And the way we can do this in our companies, our cultures, our teams, is to create an environment like Bill Campbell did at Intuit, where the meritocracy of the idea is more powerful than PowerPoint, politics, and persuasion. So how do you create an environment where the meritocracy of the idea is what matters? Am I over time? I'm getting a beat. Sorry about that. Am I on till 8:30 or am I on till 8:10? 8:20? Do you know? 8:30? Okay, I got a couple of minutes. Good. I'm making sure I'm not over time there. I apologize. You're all like, come on, dude, you put me asleep already. Hey, here's 2 tips that Bill would teach to create an environment where you can have the meritocracy of ideas overshadow PowerPoint, politics, and persuasion. The first is evidence-based assertions. Frame your point of view in a way that minimizes ego and invites discussion. And here's how it works. The frame is, because of blank, I believe blank. Because of this data, because of this experience I went through, because of this other company who's doing it, I believe we should do this. What that does is it grounds your idea in some sort of objective evidence, and it depersonalizes it so people can actually come in and attack the idea and make it better, and you won't be offended because you've actually grounded it in some piece of data. So that is a very powerful tool, evidence-based assertion. The other technique is called perspective switching. This one was made famous in the 1960s when President John F. Kennedy had just come off of a very big failure, which was the Bay of Pigs, and now he was facing Nikita Khrushchev and Fidel Castro in Cuba. And they were trying to figure out, are we going to go into Cuba? Are we going to allow the Russians to do what they're doing? And he was literally feeling this failure from the Bay of Pigs, and he had his chief of staff. The Hawks wanted him to go, the Doves wanted him to pause, and he had a younger brother, Bobby Kennedy, as the Attorney General, watching all this. Bobby Kennedy rose to the occasion and took charge. He said, Mr. President, I want you to sit and listen, and I'm going to try something. And Bobby made the Hawks argue the Doves' point of view, and he made the Doves argue the Hawks' point of view. And what happened is we went from opposition to empathy. He forced them to walk in the other person's shoe, and at the end of the day, this nation made the right decision, and we came through it successfully. And President Kennedy was actually to take that moment to hear all perspectives and make the best decision. It takes me to my last and final point of the 4 lessons. This wisdom is how to remain grounded without losing your roots, but bend when change requires you to bend. This is based on a Buddhist principle. The Buddhist principle is very simple. In the face of a fierce storm, the mighty oak stands tall and rigid, only to be snapped by the wind. But the reed, deeply rooted in the ground, bends until the storm is past and remains standing. Leadership is not about being immovable. It is about knowing when to stand firm, about knowing when to bend. It's about knowing when to push forward and when to pause, but most importantly, knowing what grounds you. What are your values and your principles? Which brings me to you. You are the change we need in this world. You represent a trophy that is not just about excellence, it is about character. The world needs more of what you do every day. And I ask you to seize these next 2 days to get your confidence and know to go out in the world and be the beacon that Bill Campbell was for so many of us. When you go out there, show people what it's like to handle hard better. Show people how you can speak without being offensive, listen without being defensive. Show people how you can build a culture where ideas matter more than egos, and show people how you can bend without losing who you are in times of change. Be bold, be curious, be kind, but please be you. You are William V. Campbell Trophy nominees. You carry the name of the greatest man that I've ever known in my life, and the world needs Bill, so the world needs you. Thank you. Have a great summer. God bless. I think I have a couple minutes for questions. I'm looking at the clock. I do actually have a couple minutes for questions. And these questions, by the way, don't have to be about these 4 principles. In prior years, people have asked questions. Am I good to wait 30?
We're waiting on Steve Young, so take your
I can filibuster? Steve Young? I thought he ran a hurry-up offense. That dude's not here? All right, I'm calling an audible. Honestly, questions about anything around leadership, anything about Bill Campbell, anything about higher ed, the fun of NIL and transfer portal that I live every day? Yeah.
How do you go about navigating? Can you speak to that even more?
I can. I'll give you an example. So I stepped into an academic setting. I never planned to do it. I don't have a PhD. I'm a non-traditional president, but I'm the first alumnus to serve Marshall in 188 years. My mom and dad had GEDs. They got me and my 2 brothers through college, so I was first gen. They bought me these rings because they kept their promise, and I've never taken this ring off because my mom and dad sacrificed for me. So this is my purpose, and it's a promise kept. So when I show up, I go to Harvard the first year, and there's a new president's forum for university presidents. At this time, started the rolling of DEI and woke and anti-DEI, and we're going to have to change all these things. And so we had an amazing president who came down from the University of Baltimore, Maryland. And he was amazing. He was a renowned leader. He had marched with Martin Luther King. And so I raised my hand and I said, sir, I've got a question. I'm living in a state right now where there's a lot of concern about the language that's used and the things that are in place. And I don't mean this to be a political statement. I mean this from a values perspective. I came from humble beginnings where people made fun of my accent when I lived in 10 states. They didn't think I was educated because I went to Marshall, not some of the other schools. And I have tried to always be a champion for the overlooked and underserved. So how can I be a university president when things may be dictated that I think are important but may not be viewed as acceptable because of the language? And he looked at me and he said, bless your heart. And I thought, dude, I was waiting for the guy to say, yeah, I marched for that. He said, do you think the students care what words or language you use? What they care about is whether you love them, you support them, and you're with them every single day. So create the environment that you know is important and forget about the words. So what I would say to you is in every one of these situations, if you can get past my ego in this case, where I was wanting to show that I was a mighty oak, I was going to stand firm, and instead realize this was really about empathy. It's about getting in the ditch with someone and saying we're going to walk out of this together. So find that thing that allows you to stay grounded in who you are, and then separate the rest and say it's okay to bend. And by the way, storms pass. And whatever the next chapter may look like, you'll still be grounded and you can figure out how to make it thrive in that scenario. So I know, by the way, this is not intended to be a political discussion. I'm not here to offer a point of view on one thing or the other. What I was telling you is a real life example of I'd gotten trained for years to use certain words, and all of a sudden those words weren't necessarily the words I was supposed to use, and I was completely confused. And I was vulnerable, and I got a little tough love. So I'm a read now. Yeah. Other questions? Yes?
Which leadership skill do you feel like was the hardest for you to improve upon?
What leadership skill did I feel was the hardest for me to improve upon? So there are 5 characteristics that I think about in leadership. One is strategic thinking. The next is drive for results. The third is building a high-performance organization or culture. The fourth is innovate for impact. And the fifth is inspire through action. And I would say to you that for me, building a high-performance culture was a skill that I had to learn and develop, because that's an environment where you go from having all the answers when you're in school to asking the right questions when you're in a leadership position. How do you actually empower people? Bill used to say, the job of a leader is not to put greatness in somebody. God already did that. The job of a leader is create an environment where their greatness can shine. So you got to figure out how you move people into positions and help them grow and develop their skills. So for me, that was hard, and really the hard part about it was sometimes you have to let people go. Now, this was another Bill Campbell thing. I don't know if it was in the book. Bill was the first to tell you when your team wasn't performing and he wanted you to fire them, but he always thought he could coach his to greatness. And I can tell you, I have that same gene. I tend to stay a little too long with an individual because I believe in my heart that they're capable, and that's the hardest thing for me to learn, is how do you know when you're going to have to say, I've given it everything I can, he or she have given it everything they can, and we've got to actually move on. And that's hard for me still. Yes? Yeah, so the question was moving to academia, a completely different world than what I lived in for 36 years. How did I figure out who to get together? I did what you're going to hear about later from Diane, and everyone talks about it. I do a listening tour, and I did it my first 100 days. I met with faculty, staff, students, alumni, donors, board of governors, political officials, other university presidents. I asked them all 3 questions. The first question is, what's the greatest untapped opportunity at Marshall University that you just can't figure out why we haven't gone after? Why is Marshall not doing this? The second question is, what's the biggest risk that you see facing Marshall that you think we have blinders and we do not actually have an action plan to go after? And the third, what's the one thing I could do to screw it up? That's where you get the gold. By the way, sometimes I alter that question to say, what's the one thing you think no one's had the confidence to tell me that you think I should know? And it's always, hey, speaking for a friend, but it's really them. But you get really good stuff. Hey, dude, you talk too much. Okay, thank you. Yeah. Others? Is Steve Young here yet?
He's going to be here in 1 minute.
1 minute. Hey, all right, we got time for another question. One more question. It's a great question. So we just did this at the Marshall University campus Monday and Tuesday of this week. We had a strategy retreat. We do it once a year. So we build an operating rhythm. Just like every organization, you have a clock or a rhythm. So this is when we think strategy. This is when we actually start to put our dashboards together. This is when we welcome students back to campus. And you try to rinse, lather, and repeat. But you want to make sure you build a time where you pull up the nose of the plane. You're not focused at the dashboard. You're focusing out the windshield. And so we come up with a framework that we all agree we're going to adopt. Because the problem is, if everyone has their own definition of leadership or their own definition of how they're going to do innovation, then you get the Tower of Babel. Nothing works. So we all agreed that we're going to adopt a philosophy, and then what happens is we train on it, we give each other feedback. I'll tell you a tool we use to give feedback, and we build it into our performance plan, and then we give them the responsibility to cascade it to their team. So in a period of about 6 months, everyone on the campus has the same definition. They understand and can teach it. It's called learn, teach, learn, and then it's actually a part of how their performance will be assessed. And it just becomes the vocabulary that you use. The best way to give feedback is a tool that we've learned at Intuit. It's called Situation Behavior Impact, SBI. In this situation, I saw you say these things. The behavior was when you did it, you had a stern look on your face and you didn't take a breath. The impact was I watched the person on the other side begin to shrivel and they didn't talk the rest of the meeting. And so you let them know in this context, this is what they did and this was the impact, and then you give them a coaching tip. So we do that with our leadership model. We say, love you like a brother, love you like a sister, but in this situation, I saw this behavior, this is the impact, and I think this is the opportunity you have to do something a little differently. Okay, we're good?
We're good. We're great.
Filibuster is over. Appreciate you. Take care.